Well, Shabbat Shalom. About 15 years ago, my family had occasion to be in New York City. And my children were just the perfect age to start really exploring a little bit of the riches that New York City has to offer. And in those days, they sold something called a city pass, which was a pass for a number of attractions in the city at actually a very good rate at the time. Hard to imagine now, actually. And because we were there for 1 week and had these wonderful city passes, we wanted to make the most of the coupons that were provided with this one price for all the attractions. So that included a trip to the top of the Empire State Building, a ride in a ferry boat around Manhattan, entry to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and special exhibits, at least one other, I think a dance or an art show that was appropriate actually for young kids, something down on the Lower East Side, might have been the Tenement Museum that trip, that's a marvelous place, and at least one other attraction that escapes me because it's a long time ago. But the last one, we did everything on the list. But our last full day in New York, we had not yet gone to the Museum of Modern Art. Probably tells you something a little bit about my priorities. I know many people love modern art. I guess we chose to do the other things first. So we had our coupon for the Museum of Modern Art still unused. And we felt that it was not getting our full money's worth to not at least try to do everything that was included in the City Pass. So took a couple hours, ran down to the Museum of Modern Art and rather tore through the building in the very little bit of time that we had. But while we were there, every stop along the way, people said, "You have to see the sculpture. You have to go to the sculpture. We have this extraordinary sculpture exhibit. You can't miss the sculpture. Don't leave without going to the sculpture." Okay, we got the hint. Couldn't leave without seeing the sculpture. There were signs and directions and people pointing the way and guards, and we had our special coupon to see the sculpture. Well, we went running through the airplane hangar size exhibit hall where the sculpture was. And we were going through room after empty room with walls on either side of us looking for the sculpture. Finally, it must have been a long week and we must have been a little punchy, but finally, in absolute desperation, since we had not found any sculpture, we turned to a nearby guard and said, "Where's the sculpture?" And he looked at us in absolute shock, I think thought we were kidding, and said, "You're standing in the middle of it." We laughed so hard and so abashedly because the giant bronze walls filling this airplane hangar-size room were the sculpture. And we didn't know. We didn't know to wonder at these enormous walls of bronze and to be amazed by them. So we laughed and laughed, had to hurry scurry out of there. And until this week, my friends, I've told that story a lot of times, I didn't know the name of the artist. The name of the artist was Richard Serra. And some of you may already have been saying, "Oh, Rabbi Shana, how could you not know Richard Serra?" Forgive me, we learn something new every day. I've thought of that scene in MoMA many times over the years without ever investigating or fully, even remotely appreciating the great art that was on display there that day. I didn't even know Richard Serra's name until this week, when I learned that he passed away at the age of 85 from complications of pneumonia. I want to thank the reporting of Roberta Smith in the New York Times for teaching me more about Richard Serra. Mr. Serra's most celebrated works had some of the scales of ancient temples or sacred sites and the inscrutability of landmarks like Stonehenge. But if the massive forms had a mystical effect, and many said that they did, it came not from religious belief, apparently, but from the distortions of space created by the leaning, curving, circular walls and the frankness of their materials. Mr. Serra was considered something new in sculpture, a flowing, circling geometry that had to be moved through and around to be fully experienced. He said his work required a lot of walking and looking, or peripatetic perception. It was, he said, viewer-centered. Its meanings were to be arrived at by individual exploration and reflection. Now, his pieces were assembled from giant plates of cold rolled steel made in mills that were more accustomed to fabricating hulls of ships. They were so heavy that they required permits to cross bridges and cranes with elaborate rigging to be set in place. They almost inevitably imparted a frisson of danger, in part because they stood on their own, as did all of Mr. Serra's work, without any benefit of screws, bolts, or welding. His leaning pieces relied on computer-plotted curves and tilts for stability. The flat, upright, slab-like elements of some pieces, suggesting both sturdy walls and also gravestones, stood because they were rarely less than 6 inches thick. And when Mr. Serra's forms expanded into solid cylinders, which he called rounds, or near cubes of solid forged steel, they were unquestionably stable, even when stacked one on the other. And I'll have some photos of those to show you in a couple of minutes. Mr. Serra was apparently every inch the sculptor. He had a compact, muscular build, a powerfully shaped head that was covered with unruly curls, until he started keeping his hair very closely cropped. He had apparently a very combative personality and an expression that bordered on fierce, even when he was smiling. He was brilliant, uncompromising, and endlessly argumentative. He spoke in a clipped, emphatic manner that could be terse or loquacious. And although he mellowed with age, even then he was described as slightly coiled, as if always ready for a fight. He had set out in life to be a painter, but he was drawn early on to sculpture and remained there for the rest of his life. He had both great notoriety and great fame over the course of his long career, with notoriety coming first. In 1971, unfortunately, a rigger was crushed to death when one plate of a piece being installed at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis accidentally came loose. Many people in the art world at that time, artists, curators, critics, museum directors, urged Serra to stop making sculpture, even though an investigation revealed that the crane operator had not been following properly the rigging instructions. Mr. Serra's early public pieces sometimes met with opposition, most famously his tilted ark that I'll show you, commissioned by the General Services Administration and completed in 1981. The work is a gently curving, slightly leaning wall of rusting steel, 12 feet high and 120 feet long. It was installed in a plaza in front of a federal office building in Lower Manhattan. Some people who worked there regarded it not just as an eyesore, but as a danger, and petitioned to have it removed. A hearing was held to consider arguments pro and con, after which the GSA decided in favor of removal. Serra was dismayed and infuriated and sued the government to keep his sculpture in place, vowing that he would leave the country if it were dismantled. He lost the suit. Tilted Ark was taken down in March 1989, but he continued to be based in New York. And yet, as the single curved planes of Tilted Ark multiplied in subsequent works to create corridors and then grew into the torqued ellipses, spirals, and S-shaped doubled spirals, Mr. Serra became increasingly popular. People lined up around the block to see his epic New York gallery shows, especially in the Gagosian Gallery's yawning space on West 24th Street in the Chelsea neighborhood of Manhattan. Walking through one of his circling labyrinths, viewers would reach the work's open center, then retrace their steps, awed by its scale and its scarred surfaces, which they could touch. and often comforted, they said, by the narrow passages created by the curving, tilting plates of steel. Combination of experiences made for an emotional force that, to Mr. Serra's discomfort, had some critics calling the work expressionistic. In many ways, his sculpture did share something with the abstract expressionists who felt that their large paintings should be experienced up close. Viewers often said that when they saw Mr. Serra's work, they felt they were walking beside a sleeping whale, if not actually walking inside one. Let me show you a couple of pictures of Mr. Serra's work. Here are these large circular cylinders. And then there at the Museum of Modern Art, which I believe was the exhibit that we saw and didn't know anything about and were unable to appreciate at that time. Yeah, 2007. Here, perhaps some of you saw at the San Francisco MoMA in 2016, one of Mr. Serra's labyrinthine pieces. This is, if you could make it out, this is Tilted Arc, the one that raised such a storm of controversy that was eventually removed. And these are the large maze-like sculptures. The one on the left, I think, was similar to the one that we stood inside of and said, "Where's the sculpture?" Gosh. Just a touch about Mr. Serra himself, because it may surprise you, although some of you may know already. Richard Serra was born November 2nd, 1938. Where? In San Francisco. The second of three sons of Tony and Gladys Feinberg Serra. His father was an immigrant from the Spanish island of Majorca, and he worked as a pipe fitter at a San Francisco shipyard during World War II. One of Serra's most vivid memories occurred on his 4th birthday, when his father took him to the shipyard to watch the launching of an enormous tanker. He later said, "All the raw material that I have ever needed is contained in the reserve of that memory," going to see the ship being launched, which has become a recurring dream. Starting when he was 15 years old, Serra regularly had summer jobs in steel mills in the Bay Area. And this may not surprise us even further. His mother was a Russian Jewish immigrant from Odessa. She was devoted to reading and to seeing that her sons succeeded. Richard Serra drew incessantly from an early age. In part, he admitted to compete for his parents' attention with his brilliant athletic older brother, Tony. Impressed by his drawings, a third-grade teacher told his mother to start taking him to museums, and she began introducing him to people as an artist. Tony Serra, some of you may be familiar, he became a lawyer well known for very left-wing views, for a vow of poverty he took, and for defending Huey Newton, co-founder of the Black Panthers and members of the radical group the Symbionese Liberation Army. Apparently, the two brothers didn't speak for more than 25 years. But Richard Serra, the artist, eventually helped pay for the college expenses of Tony, the lawyer's 5 children. Thinking about this artwork this week, and I'm really grateful that I have a chance to redeem myself a little bit for not having known of Richard Serra in 2007 at the Museum of Modern Art. But it occurred to me 2 things to take away from today. One is that we're at the beginning of the book of Leviticus, and we kind of barrel our way through Leviticus, not often having a sense of what it's all about, kind of looking around for meaning or structure in it. And yet, we need to stand inside Leviticus just and look at its detail, at the care of those who put it together, and be a little bit amazed by it, even at times over the next many weeks when it will confound and mystify us. So more about Leviticus as we go through it, but it's often not so easy to find the art in it. And lastly, I would say that our experience at the Museum of Modern Art teaches us something about life. At least it teaches me something about life. So often we're just barreling through it, rushing around, trying to squeeze every drop out of whatever our day can bring, and often not understanding even what we're looking at. We rush through so much of this life, not seeing the beauty around us, and actually actively saying, where's the art? Where's the design? All I see is chaos or just empty space. Where's the art? And sometimes it takes a sentry standing guard to look at us in disbelief, jaw on the ground, and practically shake us out of our complacency and inability to see, and say to us, where's the art? It's all around. You're standing in it. May the memory of Richard Serra be a blessing. Shabbat Shalom.